tanks versus drippers. First, let's go ahead and talk about tanks. Clearo tanks or Clearomizers, these things are really popular now in the vaping market. Okay, you got, what is this? The Atlantis, the Aspire Atlantis, you got the Aspire Nautilus, you got the Aspire Mini, you got the Kanger products. All those are Clearomizers. And what those devices all have in common is, one, they use coil heads, and two, those coil heads are usually bottom coil heads, so they screw into the base of the device, and then you got a tank section which fits over the base. You fill that sucker up, and as you vape, the juice in the tank feeds into the coil head, to the wick, and to the coil. That's how it works. And then you've got your RTAs, rebuildable tank atomizers as they're called, and these are very similar to the Clearomizer, except one thing, you've got more options. You can rebuild these suckers. It's got a similar concept to the Clearomizer, whereas the coil sits at the bottom. The coil that you rebuild, it sits at the bottom, okay, it sits on the deck, and then you've got a chimney slash shaft section that screws onto that, and then the tank screws onto that, okay, and then you fill her up, and then the juice feeds into that chimney slash shaft section, to the wick, and then to the coil that you rebuild. Again, this thing has more options than the Clearomizer. That's what entices me to it anyways. But that's the difference between an RTA and a Clearomizer. Again, rebuildable tank atomizer. And then you got something called an RDTA, rebuildable dripping tank atomizer, and all that is a rebuildable dripper with a tank on top, and you manually feed the juice that sits in the tank up top down into the chamber, to the wick, and to the coil, and that's how it works. One major thing that all these tanks that I mentioned have in common is a center shaft. Every tank that I've used has a center shaft. There's tanks out there that have wider shafts, more narrow shafts, taller shafts, shorter shafts, which may hugely affect the vape experience depending on what type of juice you're using, whether you're using a thinner juice, a thicker juice, etc. And with the major tank players in the market, they all have something in common: adjustable airflow options and massive adjustable airflow options. You got this Aspire Atlantis, which is the newest Clearomizer out in the market, and the adjustable airflow is just massive. It's like RDA experience massive. And then you got the Limo, and the Limo is still really wide open, not as quite as wide open as the Atlantis, but the flavor off the Limo is fantastic. And then you've got the Billow, and the Billow is another RTA, rebuildable tank atomizer, and the airflow from the base is just massive, just like the Atlantis, which is a Clearomizer like I mentioned. But yeah, these tanks are becoming more evolved as far as adjustable airflow options at the base. And what I found with these tanks, these major tank players out in the market, is it's all about the juice you are using. Are you using a thinner juice? Are you using a thicker juice? I find using a thinner juice in these devices work much better than using thicker juices. Some work better with thicker juices than others, like the Limo. The Limo works the best with thicker juices in my opinion, like a 90 VG and 80 VG, because it's got a wider shaft. It's got a wider shaft, you're going to get better flavor, you're going to get great vapor production. All these devices that have more adjustable airflow options at the base nowadays, they produce great vapor production. But like I said, it's all about the juice that you're putting into the tank. For you newbie vapors watching, a dripper is a rebuildable dripping atomizer. And with the dripper, you got a top cap and a deck, and your top cap fastens over the deck. And also you have airflow or adjustable airflow that sits on the outside of the device. But on the deck of the dripper, that's where you do your build. And once you've done your build, that's where you slide your wicking material through that you're using, and then you drip, and then vape. And with a freaking dripper, you're going to get freaking cracking flavor, smashing flavor. The flavor is going to be the tree's leaves, the bee's knees, the dog's bark. It's going to be the cow's milk. I mean, it is going to be the shiznat, and that's what a dripper is. You drip, you vape, you get the most concentrated vape experience possible, and you chuck the vapor. And the reason why the vapor production off of an RDA is just stellar on most of these RDAs is because of the airflow. You got tons of airflow, and the airflow is going straight to the coil. I mean, it's really super close to these coils that are sitting on the deck. And that has a huge impact on vapor production, okay? Vapor production is all about the airflow. It's all about the right amount of airflow, and a lot of these RDAs now on the market have it, okay? And then if you build it the right way on your deck, if you know how to build coils, you can get a masterpiece of vapor production. It really is an art. And like I mentioned in one of my later videos, what happens to a fire when you blow on it? It explodes! And the same thing applies to vapor production. What happens when you give the coil, the wicking coil, the right amount of airflow? The vapor production, it freaking catapults. You get plumes! Now on to flavor production. The reason why RDAs produce a more saturated flavor production than any tank out there right now on the market is because there's less distance the vapor has to travel to the mouth when you hit the fire button, okay? I'm going to repeat that again because this is big. There's less less distance the vapor has to travel when you hit that fire button when using an RDA. There's no shaft, no nothing. It goes straight to the mouth, and because of that, you're going to get a more saturated, more ooh-wee goodness of a vape experience, more goodness of a vape experience as far as flavor production than you will with an RTA, an RDTA, a Clearomizer, any tank out on the market right now. And the beauty with using an RDA is that it doesn't matter what juice you're using. You can use any juice you want anytime, and you're going to get great, great, great flavor. And also, the more of a reduced chamber that an RDA has, the better the flavor. Majority of the time, like this Vertex version 2, it's got a super reduced chamber, and that's why the flavor I get off this thing is freaking killing. That's why it's my favorite RDA right now as far as flavor production. But this does not apply to tanks. I had someone comment, and they commented, well, I don't know, Rip. Earlier you said the smaller the chamber, the better the flavor. Yeah, the smaller the chamber in an RDA, and guess what? The smaller the chamber in an RDA doesn't matter. Like I mentioned, you can use whatever juice you want. But off of a tank, it matters what type of juice you're using, okay? In those videos, I believe the video that you comment, I can't remember your name, what was it? It was the Billow. The Billow had that tiny ass shaft. It doesn't matter if it's got a small chamber because it's got way more distance to travel. If I'm using a heavy VG based juice, and in that video I was using 90 VG juice, it's gonna mute the flavor. The more the distance that the vapor has to travel, the worse the flavor. I wouldn't say the worst, but the more muted the flavor is gonna be, especially, listen here, listen, if you're using a heavier VG based juice. But if you're using a thinner based juice, you're gonna get more of an intense type of flavor. But still, I gotta argue this, just because you're using a thinner juice does not mean that you're gonna get better flavor off of something like the Aspire Atlantis, even the Limo, or the Billow, or the K-Fun V4 than you are off the RDA. Not gonna happen. Not gonna happen right now. Take something like this Limo right here, or even something like the Billow with that reduced chamber. Cut that shaft out. Cut it out, okay? Maybe even raise the chamber just a little bit so you can put more juice in there. You're gonna get an RDA experience. It's gonna be the most legit RDA experience that you've gotten, or that you have gotten off of a tank ever. And I'll tell you what, it'll be helpful, really helpful for the guys that are vaping heavy VG based juices that have more of an intolerance to PG. So to conclude this video, here's the deal. Anybody who vapes thicker juices, 90 VG, 80 VG, even 70 VG, 70 VG is kind of like the cutoff line to most of your other tanks out there. But if you vape a really thick juice, the Limo's great, and then the Big Dripper is great if you can get your hands on one. And the reason why the Limo's great for those thicker juices is because it's got a wider shaft. Now, it's nothing like a dripper. You're not going to get even close to the flavor that you're going to get off of a dripper, off of a Limo, but it's a good start. You know, if you're driving and you want something that's more convenient, the Limo's the way to go, and the Big Dripper is the way to go. For the guys that like to vape the thinner juices, and even when it gets thinner and thinner and thinner, like some guys that vape 80 PG and 70 PG, I mean, you could vape off of anything and get a saturated vape flavor experience. So in a nutshell, those are the differences between an RDA and your tank systems. This is Rip Trippers, and remember, smoking is dead, vaping is the future, and the future is now.